Still a lot of unanswered questions. Bob Seeley is a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. He'll travel next month to Washington. He's going to talk to the Senate Intelligence Committee about Moscow's activities.
Mr. Seeley has said before that he believes poison is becoming Moscow's weapon of choice. I asked him why.
They have used these weapons before in the United Kingdom, and they've used them elsewhere, and they've used them often enough to become a significant part of their armoury for what used to be known as wet jobs, assassinations. So radiation poisoning, Litvinenko, but done elsewhere as well, several cases in Russia. Dioxins, Ukrainian presidential candidate, back I think in September 2004, but other people have also died from dioxin poisoning. Now, maybe in this case, I've been talking to people this afternoon, and some people are speculating that if poison was used, and we don't know yet, but if poison was used, then we could be looking at thallium, which is a heavy metal, I think, but is very difficult to detect and is highly, highly poisonous.
There has been plenty of reporting today about the number of these hits in London. I think BuzzFeed did a huge investigation. They said something like 14. I know you don't subscribe to that particular number, but do you think there are Russians who've been...
It's not that I don't subscribe to it. I'm not sure that every single one of those 14 is a strong case. I certainly think there's probably between 9 and a dozen that should have been investigated and bizarrely weren't.
Well, that's an extraordinary number, and we don't hear an awful lot about it. So do you think the British government is covering up assassinations for political reasons?
No, I don't think... I think covering up is too strong a word. I think it is difficult to accept what is happening, even after Crimea, even after the events in eastern Ukraine. There is a reluctance to accept that Russia is embarked on a new Cold War with the West and probably has been doing so since 2007 and maybe before. And they want to undermine our alliances, our values and our institutions. And actually confronting that is difficult because it means getting one's head around these new forms of war. I'm not sure they're that new. A lot of these tools that are being used against us now are what's known as old active measures warfare. So disinformation, propaganda, espionage, assassination. This was the tools and trade of the KGB and the Communist Party back during the Cold War in the 70s and 80s. And they seem to have invented almost a new strategic art of a way of trying to undermine countries that they are opposed to. It's a very significant development, and I just don't think we've got our heads around it, and frankly we haven't wanted to get our heads around it. And the longer we hold our heads in the sand, the worse it's going to get.
Mr. Seeley, you heard Boris Johnson in Parliament today saying that there could be, if this were Russian meddling, there could be some form of retaliation. He talked about the World Cup, perhaps scaling back the UK's representation there. That doesn't sound very serious as a counter-attack against what Moscow may have done in Britain. What can the UK realistically do?
I wrote last week to all the Select Committee chairmen who are looking at doing investigations into malign Russian influence, and I said we need a common framework. We need a common definition. We need to understand this full spectrum of tools that the Russians are using. And from that, we can have a better idea of what we do. I don't think pulling out a few representatives from going to the World Cup, frankly, is going to make a blind bit of difference. I don't think even sticking another 500 troops in the Baltic Republics is going to make much of a difference. We have to work out how to counter malign Russian activity. A lot of that could be in terms of anti-corruption measures in the UK, pressuring Russian money in the UK, using some of these new powers under corruption laws. So there's soft power tools which could be very effective. But we need to think through a strategy, and sadly we haven't been doing that, and neither has the West, and I think the US was caught off guard 2 years ago extraordinarily badly. We shouldn't be waving sort of fingers and pointing at the Ruskies. That is not the right way to do it. We need to understand, and we need to think through the options and come up with some serious deterrence proposals.
Bob Seeley speaking to us a short time ago. Now, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince will